What's up, everybody? Spooky back with another video, and man, today I'm dropping some heat, dropping some fire. This is the number one like skill set that I have that makes me like steal a ton of pots and like keep my win rate high, and it also gets a ton of value. So you know, this, no doubt, if you face me and you start doing this against me, it's gonna hurt my win rate. So in exchange for making you money, I would just ask that you smash the like button real quick for a guaranteed 3 hours of run good. That is a promise. I'm gonna have to start liking my own videos so I can get my own run good. But anyway, today we're talking about overbetting, and like I said, overbetting is really strong, and it is probably the fastest way out of the micros once you get to the same skill level as everyone else. And it's just really overpowered. So there's a few things to say. One, you'll play huge pots, which gives you opportunities to make a lot of money. The reason this is important is because if you don't overbet pots and play big pots, you'll never win big pots, because the only way you're ever going to win big pots is like aces versus kings, or like set over set. But by overbetting, you're basically introducing the idea of huge pots with mediocre hands, and you are taking more control of your poker game. And by doing that, again, you can start winning these like 50 big blind pots without having anything in your hand, by bluffing people out, things like this. And you'll also steal a ton of pots that you would otherwise be checking down and simply losing. So one of my strategies is to like really overbet my draws, and by doing that, I can force people out of the pot when they have like capped ranges. And by doing that, again, instead of checking down and then you miss your draw and you just lose to ace high, you get it in with equity and you steal pots like left and right, and it's really good. Let's get into it. So the first situation, so there's two situations. The first situation is when we're bluffing. So since it's so underutilized in the micros, overbet bluffing is extremely effective. And it will catch your opponents off guard so often. And for that reason, when you put your opponents in spots that they don't know what to do, and you put a lot of pressure on them, and they have a mediocre hand, overbet bluffing is just a very strong tool. So just generally speaking, I like to do this when I know that my opponent's range is capped. For example, it's very hard for them to have like nutted hands like top set, over pairs, just like straights, things like that. So when my opponent's range is capped and I can credibly rep something, like my line is very strong, this is oftentimes when I'll overbet bluff. So basically, when I'm overbet bluffing, my line is that I have a strong hand that I'm trying to protect and I don't want to see any more cards. And so I will show that exact line here in a second, but I'm just going to finish this up this dialogue really quickly. And as I already mentioned, it's also good as a semi bluff. So for example, let's say there's about 50 big blinds in a pot, and you have a strong straight and flush draw and 75 big blinds behind. And also your opponent's range isn't incredibly strong, and they don't seem like a particularly strong player. This is the perfect time to shove 75 big blinds and put your opponent in a horrible spot. It's just a spot no one wants to be in. So what we want to do as winning poker players is put people in these horrible spots where we have a lot of equity and their hand is relatively weak. So now I'm going to show you an example. So I decided to 3-bet this hand, which, you know, that's not what this video is about. So I guess I'll just skip over the fact that I 3-bet sevens. And we get a call. And when someone calls here, their range is already fairly defined. You're probably looking at like ace, queen, pocket tens, just these like strong but not super strong hands. Of course, this is going to depend on the player, but we're not too worried about the strength of this person's hand. And then when under the gun calls as well, basically what we've come to, the conclusion we've come to is that it's impossible for these guys to have aces or kings. Not impossible, but just incredibly unlikely, aces, kings, queens. Whereas we have all pocket jacks, pocket eights, pocket queens, kings, aces, ace, king. We have all these really strong hands in our range, as well as like ace, king with the ace of clubs. So we have a very wide and strong range. And for this reason, my c-bet here is a little bit ambitious, but it's not the worst thing in the world. But as you can tell, we're just going to go with this hand. So when someone calls here, again, it's just unlikely that they have a very strong hand. It's fairly likely that this guy has like queen jack suited, obviously not of clubs, maybe even ace jack, maybe ace queen with the ace of clubs. But the point is that the king on the turn is a very good card for our range. Now we can easily rep ace king. We can also rep pocket queens, and we can also rep pocket aces that doesn't want to see another club. So we have a lot of very strong cards in our range, a lot of very strong hands in our range. And it's pretty unlikely that under the gun has something that he's willing to call off his whole stack with. And it's for this reason that I actually end up bombing the turn. And this is what I was just talking about. I'm basically representing something like queens, ace, king, or aces. I don't want to see any more cards, and I just want to end the pot here. And these kinds of bets are extremely effective. It's basically saying I have, at worst, pocket queens here, and I just have a very strong hand, and I'm willing to bet that my opponent has something that simply cannot call this bet. And it turns out that I was right. So that's an example of knowing when your opponent's range is capped and you are able to shove a big amount of money in the middle and kind of force them to fold. It certainly does not always work, but I can tell you I've made so much more money by doing this than I've lost money by getting called down because, well, simply, you know, you're going to fail, you're going to do some bad spots here and there, but this is a very good strategy. Like I said, especially at the micros because it's so underutilized. All right, so part two. Now we're going to be talking about overbetting for value. So generally speaking, this is, I mean, they're both nuanced points, but this one is slightly more nuanced because if you want to get called, there has to be a dynamic already set at the table to where it makes sense for you to be value bet or for you to be bluffing, to where you might be bluffing as an overbet and it makes sense in your opponent's head. Because if you just go around overbetting randomly and your opponents aren't catching on, then it's really, really unlikely that they're going to call you down light, and it just wouldn't make sense for you to overbet for value. So now these are some of the situations where someone might want to call you if you're overbetting for value. So the first situation is your opponent is a maniac and they might just call you down for no reason. This is the type of player that just likes to play big pots. Since they bluff so much, they are willing to give you credit for a lot of bluffs. Even if you haven't done that, sometimes that's just what happens is that the table dynamic is one such that there's a lot of bluffing going on, and even though you specifically haven't done any overbet bluffing, they're willing to accept that you might be overbet bluffing. And for that, in that instance, sometimes it's okay to overbet bluff or overbet for value and hopefully get called by a lesser hand. Another situation is you've been bluffing a lot and you were maybe caught recently by a reg or someone who has shown that they're willing to call you down. So for example, if like 3 hands ago we just played a pot where we got caught bluffing and the opponent is, they're onto us, they know that we're capable of making these big plays. But now we hit a set and we've been barreling down, and now it would make sense for us to barrel very large and even overbet because the dynamic has been set to where we might be doing this because we just got caught bluffing and we're trying to take it to the next level. But again, if you haven't been caught bluffing and there's no reason for them to expect you to be overbet bluffing, then an overbet value bet simply wouldn't make any sense because they're just going to fold darn near 100% of the time. And then the third situation, and this one is the most relevant to this video, of course, is if you've already been overbetting and whether it's for value or bluffing, if people at your table know that you've been overbetting, it's now okay for you to start overbetting for value. Especially if if you've been bluffing. Even if you've been caught overbet bluffing, that's not the worst thing in the world, because now you can do it for value versus these same players. So that is the last situation where it makes sense. And the reason I emphasize this is because at the micros, overbetting is so unusual that it's just going to work as a bluff so darn often that doing it for value, in my opinion, there needs to be a very specific table dynamic going on in order for it to make sense. So I'm actually going to show you an example right now. So here we have a hand that's been checked around, and we turn a very strong draw, which is a straight draw and a nut flush draw. And this isn't the reason I'm showing this video, but I am overbet bluffing the turn because of this draw, which is, you know, consistent with what I've been preaching. But when someone calls this overbet, usually in my experience, it's because they have a flush draw and they think that if they hit, that they're gonna hit big and they're gonna stack you for your whole stack or something. They're gonna get a nice big value bet, because by overbetting the turn, we're representing that we have something like a set, a strong two pair, even a straight. So for whatever reason, my read was spot on this guy, and when he calls the turn for an overbet, I put him exactly on a flush draw. And when the flush gets there, I'm basically saying that I'm scared of the flush. I think he got there, and then it turns out I was right. So he goes for a half pot value bet, and I actually jam. So I jammed for $9 into about a $4 pot. So this is about twice the size of pot, but I'm doing it for value. And the reason I'm doing this is because I already overbet the turn, and I already kind of showed that I'm capable of doing these crazy plays. And also, I think his range is incredibly strong. I think he has a flush 100% of the time. Not 100%, but very, very often here. And for these two combined reasons, I thought an overbet bluff was warranted. And, since I'm showing this hand, you can assume that I'm right. And he did have the 8-10 of diamonds, I believe. Yeah. So I'm going to do this. So with that example, a lot of things had to align, and you do have to be thinking about these things as you go through. You can't just go around overbetting 50 big blinds into 20 big blinds and expect it to work. You have to have good reasoning, but hopefully this video will give you an idea of what kind of reasoning your mind, your thought process should be going through. So now I'm just going to give you the last tip, which is how to start implementing this, because as I just said, I don't want you guys just going out there and bombing away for no reason. You have to have some rhyme to your reason. Unless you're playing against me, you can feel free to shove all your chips in the pot and I will gladly call you. But in terms of how to implement, it's pretty simple. I just want you guys to start overbetting in spots that it's obvious for you to bluff and it makes sense. So when this happens, it's usually like, one example that comes to mind in a hand that I played yesterday was like, I raised on the button, the small blind called, they donk bet into me and then checked the turn, and I just overbet the turn by 2x pot, and he just snap folded. So this is what I would consider an obvious spot to bluff, is that someone who's a donk, they donk bet into a bad board, and then they check the turn and shows a lot of weakness on a good turn for our range. These are good times to just start implementing overbet bluffs, especially when they're not in huge pots. That's a good way to learn, because you don't want to start bluffing off stacks right away. So yeah, I just want you guys to try overbetting in these smaller pots where your opponent's range is capped, especially in heads up. I don't want you going crazy with overbetting in three-way pots. I really don't recommend that. I don't have that figured out, to be honest with you. But once you get an idea for when to bluff, you can also start incorporating the other part of this strategy, which is overbetting for value. So this can be done once your opponents kind of feel like they might be catching on to what you're doing. They're starting to tank and call you a little more. They're starting to play back at you. This is when you can start overbetting for value. So that is the video. I know this one was a little bit long, but hopefully you got some really good information out of it. Once again, I'm going to ask you, please drop a like for 3 hours of Run Good. It helps both of us out. Lastly, I've got resources below if you want a checklist for how to beat the micros. You can check that out. If you want to buy coaching, you can check that out. If you want to sign up for ACR and you want to go through my link, you can also check that out. So there's all sorts of links down there that'll help you out. That's going to do it for today's video. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.